Well, first repair for the year 2022. What have we got here? Retina I, type 010, post-war Retina I. Post-war, focus is quite stiff. It's got a real big problem here. The film advance is absolutely jammed. There's no motion there at all. That's really stiff. And something else unusual. There's no space between the knob and the top of the case. Here's what it would normally look like, and there's a distinct gap between the case and the knob, and there's some wiggle room there. This one, there's no wiggle, no room, and it doesn't move at all. Anything else unusual? Well, somebody's put a jacked up accessory shoe on the top there, which must have made rewinding the film a little bit entertaining. Presumably to fit a rangefinder or something else of that nature on there. Anything else? Well, the struts don't open correctly. This pin is not dropping up into position. It tells me that there's not much spring tension on there. It tells me the struts are bent. The front of the camera is somewhat sloppy, as you can see. Leather's coming adrift. Going to need a little bit of remedial attention there, I would say. And the leather has lost its blackness. It's no longer the black shiny leather it used to be. I might be able to do something about that. The missing paint on the back, yeah, I probably won't repaint it. Okay, so I've got to get into this camera. And all of our secrets and problems revolve around this advance knob there, which doesn't move in either direction and is certainly problematic. I've got to get that thing loose. This could be a problem. I need to get a spanner on there so I don't break things. And of course I need to rotate it into position so that I can get a spanner on there. And this whole advance shaft is seized up. Right. This one's going to be a problem. I need to get something on here so I can rotate that knob. Well, as you can see, I've got a hose clamp on there, and I know as soon as I got that on there, I was able to turn that to loosen it, and we can take it off. Now it's full of dirt. I can't immediately tell whether that's full of sand or not. It looks to me like the pieces underneath it are displaced. It's possible even that something's missing there. So let's take the top cover off and have a look. There are two screws. It's missing the top of the shutter release button. That's of course not unusual. It's probably more common than not. Take these screws out. Lift that top off. Yeah, there's something missing. There should be a piece in here, a spacer, that holds this down, and this screws on top of it. It's missing. So I'm going to be raiding my spare parts bins. So the reason this camera doesn't work is somebody has been in to repair it and they've lost things. I'll hunt through my bits of parts for the type 010 and we shall see if I can make this thing at least attempt to work. Well, this is the sort of part I was looking for. It's got a little raised bit underneath there, and that would keep this lever in position. Now there were two styles, one type screwed on The other type simply sat on there. Let's just put this in place. See if it'll run down far enough. It's not full of enthusiasm to run down. No, it's not going to go. That's not the right one. I want one that's just a plain cylinder with a relieved end like that. So I'll go back to looking through my parts. Well, with a piece poached from another camera, a Type 011 I think, I'll put that piece in place. Let's put the knob back on. Just cock the shutter. I'm rolling the sprocket with my thumb and see if that shutter release will release it. I've got to get it over its post, of course. It does. So the Film Advance now does work. I wouldn't say it was a wonderful thing, but it does work. Given the amount of filth in here, sand and grit and dust, it's a wonder it works at all. But this was what was missing. This piece. And it can only have become missing by somebody having removed the top, removed the shutter release button probably and lost that promptly, removed the Film Advance knob here, lost this piece completely, put the top back on, put this on, and everything was jammed up and couldn't possibly move. So that's the mystery. Well, that's the answer to solving the mystery problem, is putting a piece in place there that had just gone AWOL. So we'll put that to one side, put that to one side, and strip the rest of this down, I suppose. Well, here's the advance and rewind lever, that can come off. The shutter release will come out. It's pretty grimy and it's somewhat chewed up looking here too. It's not sure what's happened to that. Nothing good. Frame counter, that's 3 pieces really if you count the spring. I'll put the spring to one side and the dial to one side because otherwise I'll lose all the numbers if I try and clean that in the ultrasonic cleaner. The gear can go through the ultrasonic cleaner. I'm just sorting these pieces out now as I go so that I'm putting them somewhere useful. Let's have a look at this rewind knob. I can see problems here. There's the knob, nothing particularly odd about that. One of the 2 screws that holds it in place is missing, so that's going to need to be replaced. That shoe is holding things down in place and I can't see screws from underneath, so it's got to be screwed in from the top. Take that screw out of the front. This of course is not some Kodak manufactured part. See if we can unhook all these pieces at once from here. And slide this thing back out of the way. Reluctant. That's that. There are 4 mismatched screws holding this down. I don't know that they were ever they may be Loctited in place. They are unusually tight. The holes that they screw into may never have been threaded properly. They could even be glued in place for all I know. I think we'll just leave that plate in place. I'm going to clean around it rather than removing it all. I don't think there's any point chasing that. Okay, back to this film advance end here. Let's take this off. This couples to the sprocket and effectively meters the amount of film that's pulled through each time that the film advance moves. Now there are two small springs, one at the back, one at the front. I'm just unhooking those and I'll take this out. Since I know someone's been in here that shouldn't, I'm checking closely to make sure that the pieces are present that I would expect to be present. That all looks good. Have those two screws out and recover the springs. I'll pick up that screw that went on the floor. Let's have these gears off. And 3 screws holds this guide bush for our film advance in place. Yeah. Get all of those off. This is just a bit dirty and gritty. It's obviously been to the beach more than once in its life. Okay, so that's the film advance stuff off there basically. That screw doesn't need to come out. The sprocket, if it moves freely, there's no advantage in pulling that out. If it was stiff, I certainly would. You're going to have to dismantle it. There are 2 tiny screws, one here and one here, which hold these pieces in place on the shaft. You back those screws right out. Now, be very careful not to lose them, they're quite small. Then you can slide that shaft out. There's a washer here, a spacer washer between the sprocket and the top of that body. You got to make sure that's in place. I'll just pull out the film take-up spool. And now I think remove the lens and shutter assembly. I have a tool here for undoing the retaining ring. This was made by Beljan in the USA. Mr. Beljan no longer makes them, but they were a handy tool. No, that's slipping. I'm going to have to use something else. I've got another tool here which is somewhat more robust. Well, I'm looking at the notches where this thing tightens up. They're not in a good state. So obviously people have fought with this in the past. Yeah, it's not good at all. Okay, this could be entertaining. I think I can get this tool down in place. This is somewhat more robust. I can feel the lens turning. Yeah. Okay, it's coming loose. Oh. And I'm not sure whether that was the tool jamming on the body or whether the thread is just completely clogged with paint. I think it's the thread. Okay. I'm just going to close the front of that dribble some solvent down around that retaining ring, let it soften, that paint, because somebody's obviously sealed that in there with some paint or lacquer, and then that will hopefully unscrew smoothly. I'll just try a drop or two of this. Which is CRC Lectraclean. Don't flood it, because once you get everything wet in there with any sort of solvent, you're absolutely committed. You're then going to have it apart to clean everything, even if you do nothing else. Let's see if that'll work for me. It's coming loose. It's not enthusiastic. Okay, that's that loose. Now our shutter release here is still holding this in place, so I'm going to lift that screw out. It's a very long screw. But it's quite fine, and being quite fine, it's quite easily damaged. Okay, so that's our shutter and lens assembly free. The retaining ring should come out. Now it's so mutilated looking that it probably doesn't want to. I'll pull that out later. Just look at my focus scale here. The scale ring shows a bit of scarring about the place. The focus is very stiff. Well, before I was so rudely interrupted by the camera telling me the card was, well, I was saying about this focus scale ring. Now, there are little marks in it near those screw heads, which tells me that once upon a time those screw heads sat where those marks are. It means that the focus scale ring is probably shifted on the outer helical, and as a result the focus could be absolutely anywhere. I'm going to mark it anyway so I know its current position, just on the off chance that actually that will do the job. And then I'll remove it. So I want to mark the position of the outer helical and the focus scale ring. Now the inner helical is sticking up quite high, so this is not convenient, but I want to scribe a couple of lines across here. And I'll do one on the other side, just so that I've got some guide as to where that's sat. That's good, that's all I need. Now I know where it was before I took it apart, not necessarily where it should have been. Remove those 4 screws. It doesn't look like the focus scale ring has ever popped off those screws completely, but it could certainly have shifted. Let's recover those 4 screws. I've recovered 3 of them. Well, there's the 4th one. The focus scale ring on the Type 010 are often as ugly as this. They did a very poor job of preparing the metal and chroming it. I suspect that they skipped something. I know to get a decent chrome job the metal's got to be absolutely clean, but you have to put down you don't just chrome straight onto steel typically. I think it's got to have a layer of nickel or a layer of copper under there, one or the other or both, and it hasn't got it. Right, so I'll remove this retaining ring. There's 6 small screws, and these are all the same size as those 4 that held the focus scale ring in place. Now even if the focus had been smooth, I'd still be needing to take all this apart because I want the struts out of the camera body, because the struts are obviously bent, and I can tell they're bent because things don't click into place nicely as they should. Well, there's our retaining ring. I'll probably take out the inner and outer helical together. Now these, I'm going to rotate these, the inner and outer together, until I've got the front surface level with each other. Then I can scribe a line across it. I'll have a reference point to go back to. That is exceptionally stiff. You can probably see the filth in here. This is just terrible dried grease and rubbish. I'm just going to put a drop of solvent on there to allow me to rotate this a bit further. Yeah, I want the front surfaces to be absolutely level when I put my scribe line across, so I've got a good reference. And I put my own marks on here previously, so I want to follow up from those, I think. There are other people's marks on here as well. I think I've got 2 marks there. That must have been from the base. And there'd be one opposite at the top. That would be there. There. That looks good. Now it means I can take those apart and clean them, because they're very, very stiff. That grease is dried, it's just caked hard, it's just completely jamming everything up. That's not the camera we're working on. What have we got? This is our victim. Right, there are 4 small screws, black ones, which pass through the focus mount and screw in. They hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. Now, one at that corner doesn't want to move. It possibly means it's rusted in place, and if it is rusted in place, it'll snap. Yeah, that one doesn't want to move either. I might remove the door at this point, just so I can collapse the front and still get access to those screws. So I'm going to remove the top hinge pin screw. The bottom hinge pin screw is still under the leather here. I'm not going to disturb that. I'll collapse the front slightly. I can lift this off out of the way. Take that arm off. Now I can collapse the struts right down, and I can apply some force to this now without damaging the struts. So I'm trying to get these 2 screws to come loose. Well, that one's behaving. That's coming loose straight away. I couldn't make any headway on that when the struts were extended. And this one here, the same. So we can recover that screw and its mate over here. Now while I've got it here, I'll undo the 4 large screws. Those 4 large screws hold the focus mount to the back of the front standard. Some of these screws are pretty chewed up looking, which tells me someone's been in here before. And yeah, ugly things like that. And either their technique was poor or their tools were poor, or a combination of both. Right, we extend those struts. It might be easier said than done. That's better. I can lift that focus mount off there. That's going to need to be cleaned by hand. The struts are as wobbly as, they're certainly damaged. Right, so now I want the leather off the base of the camera. 2 screws hold the depth of field scale to the base of the camera. And those dials I will not put through the ultrasonic cleaner because it would strip the paint out of the markings and I'll have to have the tedious business of putting that back. The other pieces can. Now this leather, will it come up? It's quite tight here around that boss because probably the leather shrunk somewhat, so it's quite tight over there. It's also well glued down. It's very stiff. Which will be something to do with the leather itself and something to do with the adhesive. I've got to get at a screw that's back at this point. So I've got to peel the leather back at least as far as there. Ideally I want to peel it all the way off, but we don't always get what we want. Tricky to make sure the scalpel gets down right into the glue layer, right down between the interface of the adhesive and the camera body. I don't want it lifting and delaminating that leather. That leather's very stiff, it's like lifting a sheet of hardboard. Well, that just slid under at that point. Alright, I'll see if I can get that leather up completely. You can hear that scalpel scraping against the camera body. That'll be leaving scratches in the body, but of course they're all hidden by the leather bits. It's better than the leather getting torn or cut. Okay, so our leather's free. Our struts, there's a screw here which came loose without a fight. Be a screw at the top of the camera in the same relative position. That came loose without a fight. There will be 2 in the film cassette chamber. And they came out without a fight. Now normally I would have to give everything a little tap with a hammer to get those free. Now the struts should come out. There's a return spring for the shutter release here. Now that is quite brown, probably a bit suspect. There are 2 spaces, one at the top and one at the bottom, that went between the struts and the camera body. They won't be present in every camera because some of them, the struts had a kick in them that actually took up that space. Well, here's our struts. As you can see, they're pretty wobbly. This arm is floating about here. There's something wrong there. That's not sitting over the post. It should sit there. Yes, that's not sitting correctly. So I'm going to straighten these struts out. The inner ones should be dead flat. The outer ones should have a bit of a dish in them, so that when pressure is applied at this point, it tends to act to push these buttons out so they lock in position. It looks to me, I don't know whether that's rust I'm seeing or whether that's a fibre washer, but there's a washer at this point which I wasn't really expecting to see. Alright, well, you can see all the mess on my desktop here. It's come out of this camera body. It's pretty filthy. I'll have to clean all this rubbish up, clean the inside of the body, clean the top, clean all around this mount here for the accessory shoe, and scrape off any loose adhesive there, but there probably isn't much. It's probably stuck quite well. I'll check that the tripod socket screws are tight. Frequently they're not. There's nothing under there I need to remove. They're quite tight, so I'll leave that in place. Alright, so all this stuff is going to need to be cleaned. I've got my mechanical components here. They can go into the ultrasonic cleaner. They will need to be cleaned initially in solvent. I've got some wax and grease remover and they'll be cleaned in that. And then they'll be cleaned in a ammonia-based domestic detergent. They'll get at least 20 minutes in each type, and that should just clean all that rubbish out. So everything should, all the parts should come back like new parts, more or less. Now here's my retainer ring for the shutter is here. That really doesn't want to come out from there. It's because it's been somewhat stretched. Let's see if I can get that out. It should just fall out. It's not a larger diameter than that ring there. It's coming out.